Welcome to ILTV Security Brief. I'm Kalev Ben David. Each week, we focus on the latest developments in security and defense relating to Israel and the Middle East, impacting on this region and beyond. And we start with our top items of the past week. The IDF moves into the Hamas stronghold of Deir el-Balach, aiming to press the terror group into agreeing to a hostage agreement, as U.S. mediator Steve Witkoff heads to the region aiming to close a deal. Staff Sergeant Amit Cohen is killed in a blast in Khan Yunis, and Reserve Sergeant Major Vladimir Loza by a collapsed building in Rafah, raising the death toll in the Gaza operation to 455. 8 people are injured when a terrorist drives his vehicle into a bus stop near Kfar Yona in central Israel. The attacker succeeded in fleeing the scene and is being hunted by security forces. A ceasefire between Israel and Syria, mediated by the U.S., appears to be holding after days of sectarian violence in the city of Sweda, in which hundreds of Druze were killed in clashes with Bedouin and government forces. Israel warns Syria it may renew military action against the regime if attacks against the Druze continue. The IDF intercepts a Houthi missile over Israel on Tuesday, a day after Israeli drones hit Yemen's Hodeidah port, targeting Houthi military infrastructure. Defense Minister Katz warns that Yemen's fate will be the same as Tehran if the Houthis continue to attack Israel. Israel's most decorated fighter pilot, Reserves Brigadier General Giora Evan Epstein, dies at 87. Nicknamed Hawkeye, he scored a record 17 combat kills against Egyptian aircraft over his storied military career. And now our main story. IDF ground forces this week, for the first time, entered the Hamas stronghold of Deir el-Balach in central Gaza. The operation is intended to up the pressure on Hamas to agree to the latest U.S.-mediated proposal for a hostage release and ceasefire deal, or face a sustained Israeli assault on their remaining forces. But military action in the densely populated area, at a time of mounting domestic concern and international criticism over the Gaza operation, carries the risk of greater casualties both for IDF troops and the Palestinian population. Can advances on the Gaza battlefield withstand the growing external pressures on Israel? Well, joining us now for more, is Dr. Fadi Essmael. He is a research fellow at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. Fadi, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
But first, let's go to our correspondent, Shosh Bedrosian, for the latest developments regarding Gaza. And Shosh, we know the U.S. is making a concerted effort now to reach an agreement. What is the latest developments on that?
Sure. So what we know right now is that Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, is actually in Italy right now to discuss the ceasefire and hostage proposal that's currently on the table right now. He is in Italy meeting with Qatari and Israeli officials. But what we know right now is that Hamas just recently submitted their most recent response. And this was a bit more softened than what we've seen in the last 24 hours. The first time they responded to this proposal on the table, after a week of letting it hang with no decision made, they came back to the table just a few days ago, basically with more demands. And the Qataris and Egyptian mediators basically said, go back and come back to us when there's something tangible we can work with. So now they've submitted a softened response, but brand new reporting from Axios is actually reporting that even though they have a softened response, there are still significant gaps that exist in order to get to the final conclusion, to bring this deal to fruition at this point in time. It's just a matter of what Steve Witkoff is able to do while meeting with officials inside of Italy at this point in time. Because if there is significant progress made, Kalev, it is very possible Witkoff could be going to Doha to pretty much close this deal.
All right, Shosh Bedrosian of ILTV, thank you for that.
Thanks.
Fadi, clearly the U.S. making a major push now, the seriousness indicated by Steve Witkoff's visit, first to Italy, perhaps to the region. How close do you think we are to reaching a deal? Even as Shosh just reported, there are still gaps to remain, especially Hamas's counter-proposal.
How close? We would try to predict things that are very hard to predict, but clearly Washington wants this deal months ago because all this the situation in Gaza and other areas is really slowing the president's plan to create a whole new dynamic in the region. This is like the main issue is Gaza, and it came even to the degree where the White House very clearly, very openly said, we don't like what we see in Gaza, and directing that at Israel. In terms of the United States government, they want this deal signed a long time ago. They have other bigger fries bigger fishes to fry the region. I'm sorry, it's been a difficult week. And the issue of Gaza is just stands in the way. Now, of course, for Israel, it's a different situation. For Israel, it's a major national security matter. And within that gap, therein lies the daylight that we see between two positions. I think that eventually it will have to happen in the next few weeks for a very simple reason. No matter how strong are the pressures inside the government, the Israeli government, so the cabinet, the Israeli street is very loud and clear on what it wants. Mm-hmm. There's really no question there. It's cut and dry. The Israeli public wants this deal now and wants it, and this in and of itself is a point of weakness in negotiations, because the other side also knows how to read Israeli newspapers. They know how to read Israeli polls, and to them it's a point of advantage in the negotiations, and they will use it, and they are using it. Just like the issue of starvation.
Well, let me ask you about that, because Hamas also knows how to read and to exploit the international media.
Yes.
And what clearly, certainly what Israeli officials are charging is they are using this situation, they are Hamas disrupting efforts to distribute aid to, in fact, create a situation of food shortages, hunger, potentially even starvation in Gaza, in order to pressure Israel to make concessions.
Yes, the way Saddam Hussein did it during his days with his own sanctions, when there were, I remember, those containers of food rotting away in ports in Europe, in Marseille, other places, and he wouldn't let those containers come into Iraq in order to create a problem of medical supplies and food and so on. Yeah, these people, I mean, we know what we're dealing with here. Yes, sure, so he causes his people some major inconvenience, but that's not a consideration for him. He found a point of weakness here, something that he can relate to the international community, and he's going to hit it all the way as much as he can. When I say he, I mean the leaders, the leaders of Hamas. In a sense, Israel just walked into that trap. But again, with these kinds of people who think in that way, if you don't think like them, you will keep on walking into those traps. So you set this international organization, mostly American, that has
the Gaza humanitarian fund.
JF, and you think you solve the problem. That's if you think like a Westerner. But if you think like those guys thinking, you realize it doesn't do the job. We've seen this issue with many third world countries. I mean, in terms of aid to disaster areas and so on. There's always some local militias that know to take their own, that use that, the ability to hinder access to the disaster area.
Right, to exploit that situation to their own benefit.
We saw it in Somalia, we saw it in Central Africa, we see it in every place where you have those kinds of bullies taking over regions, because to them, human suffering means nothing in the larger picture. You know, it's like there is a big perspective here, and human suffering is a fleeting thing. That's the way they would think. And Westerners always fall into that trap. They think in Western values, post-World War II Western values. You can't work with that in this region. You just can't. It doesn't. You will always walk into those traps and fail.
Right. Now, as you said, there is pressure on to make this hostage deal, but we know that's a temporary ceasefire on the table, 60 days, the release potentially of 10 living hostages. But still, Israel at this stage would have to likely resume fighting in Gaza even after that, or to continue to do so. What are the challenges, especially now it's moved into Deir al-Balach? We're seeing casualties, a densely populated urban area. What are the challenges for the IDF and the government to sustain that offensive, given the risks this pose?
Well, the tactical issues are kind of almost obvious. I don't think we have to talk about them. Clearly, it's urban warfare in a super dangerous area, very highly booby-trapped, and we know that, okay? I'm more on the policy level now, thinking about this. In terms of whether it's possible or not possible, of course, if you're willing to lose hundreds of soldiers, you can do anything, basically. Yeah, of course, you can go in and take a piece of property that you'll probably leave in a few weeks. So here's a question. Now, politically speaking, policy, would the Israeli government will have the ability to go back into full fighting mode in 2 months?
Right, which is a question many have asked.
And that's one of the issues why those who are against this deal say, hey, who tells you that we can do this again? But again, the Israeli public opinion is very clear. I mean, it is not even open to any kind of interpretation. There's no. So would the Israeli public, after 2 months, whoever is coming back from the hostages, would they be ready for another? I don't know.
Right. Now, you mentioned a Gaza ceasefire being part of President Trump's broader plans for the region. Let's look into that. If we, for example, get that 60-day ceasefire and then negotiations towards a final agreement on Gaza and beyond, what could that look like? What is the goal that the Americans want to see, and how might that impact, certainly, what would be Israel's place in that?
Well, we know what President Trump is trying to do in the region. He's trying to go to the business mode where everybody is getting along with everybody because they can make money together. We can debate whether this is exactly what the region thinks. Apparently, Saudi Arabia seems to think in those terms. That's fine. Apparently, United Arab Emirates seems to think in those terms. That's fine. Do others, and I think we'll talk about others, do they also think in those terms? And okay, we'll stop the fighting in Gaza. That will enable the Houthis, for example, to lift their pressure. And then it will be a major relief for international trade. With everything that it means. It means the insurance prices come down, back down. Commodities will become cheaper again. The markets will replenish again. Although now they're not doing too bad, but they can do. I mean, this is temporary. This is like a temporary doing well. I mean, it will be very different in the New York Stock Exchange, in my opinion, in a few months. But if all of a sudden we open those, the Red Sea goes back to work, all of a sudden that situation in the markets will be much better. And this is, I mean, we're talking here about interests that are global in nature. If we take it even higher than that, you have the U.S.-China rivalry and the ability of President Trump and his administration to create some kind of a wall here in front of the Chinese expansion, the Belt and Road Initiative and so on, is critical. It can change. It can actually ensure another American century if he does that. Here's a question: is he? And then you have these Gazans, and then you have the Druze, and you just standing like big flies in the ointment. Right. And he needs to finish it.
Well, since you raise it, we're going to move on to another topic, because you mentioned the Druze, for example, in Syria. And Israel, in fact, has agreed to halt its attacks on Syrian military targets in return for a pledge from Damascus that its forces would work to end sectarian violence in Sweda instead of aiding Bedouin there in attacks that have taken the lives of hundreds of Syrian Jews. Now, among those was Hossein Suraya. He was a Syrian-American. His family says was executed by militants who were supported by the regime. But can the Syrian leader Ahmed al-Shaara be trusted to keep his word? Does he even have the power to do so? Well, let's hear from one Druze resident of Sweda.
أحكي عن نفسي الحمد لله نحن هون أهل بيتي سلام ولكن طلعوا على البيوت نزلوا الأشخاص سبوا نساء نزلوا أرواح وأعدموا بهذا المكان 14 شهيد كان بنهار 19 الشهر أعدموهم رميا بالرصاص بالبيكاسيه غير اللي طلعوا على المشفى الوطني قتلوا العالم عملوا مجازر فظعوا فهذه لنا حكومي ولنا قوات فض نزاع لأنه هذا جيش نزل مؤلف ما بين وزارة الداخلية هيئة وأمن وكله متعاون وما بين وزارة دفاع شرطة عسكرية وجيش معطين تعليمات للإبادة للدروز.
And Fadi, a terrible situation for the Druze in Gaza, felt keenly by the Druze community in Israel, from which you're from. Clearly, the Druze in Syria, that gentleman does not trust the regime, does not trust Ahmed al-Shaara. to keep the peace, quite the opposite. What is your assessment of how far Israel and the world can trust the Syrian leader?
First of all, in terms of the numbers, we have names already of about 1,500 dead, and assessing by the places that were destroyed, the village and so on, we are like can estimate we're going to be upwards 5,000 to 6,000 fatalities. As of now, it's not over. And that's basically what we have, and I'm very, very close to the people working on that. In terms also of the translation, there's one word there that the women were not insulted, the women were captured and taken to be used as sex slaves.
Wow.
We have today names of a few hundreds of women, and we have published already, for sure, names of 140 that we know are there in the hands of ISIS. Now, as far as Julani, or what's his... By the way, his name is not al-Shaara.
I know. I'm using the name that he is taken on.
The Shaara family, who is a very respected Syrian family, already issued a statement, he's not ours. We don't know where he is. So God knows where he came from. He just, materialized out of thin air, just like al-Baghdadi.
Well, he came from the ranks of al-Qaeda or
yeah,
Islamic
but all of
State,
these guys, they're very weird people there. Now, this guy, Julani, I also heard that he's asking Turkey to help him with ISIS. And I was thinking to myself, so you have the head of ISIS asking the sponsor of ISIS to help him with taking care of ISIS. I'm thinking about international media, which is made out of intelligent people. How do you even fall for that? Seriously, well, is it this? I sometimes, halfway jokingly say that Western intelligence services seem to have this fetish with these extreme Islamist organizations, beginning from decades ago, go back to the Taliban. I remember when the Taliban came into Afghanistan, and Mrs. Albright there somebody told her they're going to be a great stabilizing force in Afghanistan. We saw how that happened. And all the way to how good-looking the good-looking guy al-Shaara is, which we heard from President. What is with this fetish? These guys are ISIS. Well, that's all you need to know. All of a sudden, ISIS is okay? How do you even believe it? I'm just surprised. What is it? What is this psychological need to trust the worst of people, whether the name is al-Shaara or you go all the way to Stalin and at the time even Hitler?
All right,
so you know what I'm saying? No, we know who this guy is.
Right.
He gave the orders. We have the orders recording, voice and print. We have the prisoners of war that were caught with the names, the serial numbers, with their IDs. It is the ISIS government that we call today the Syrian government who did this by orders. We know that. We can prove it. We have shared this information with the rest of the world. But the problem is it's inconvenient. It's an inconvenient truth, and I get it.
Well, let's talk about a specific example. Because, for example, you also worked in the U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
There is actually a bill in the Congress now to hold the Syrian regime accountable for its actions if sanctions are going to be lifted. And we saw President Trump begin the certainly process of lifting those sanctions on the regime.
Yeah.
So what should be done? First of all, we'll get to Israel in a minute. For example, the U.S. when it comes to Syria, this issue of sanctions.
First of all, speak in one voice. The business of having the ambassador, who is also the envoy to Syria, Mr. Barak, speaking in trying to defend, protect.
That's Tom Barak, the U.S. envoy to Syria and ambassador to Turkey.
He is trying all the time to protect the regime. He even recently is willing to admit that there are atrocities taking place by someone. He's not going to say who. And on the other side, we have Secretary Rubio using quite a strong language about this. So we need a very clear language, very, very clear language that will include very strong protections for all the groups in Israel, not only the Druze. You have the Alawis who are still suffering. It's not over what's happening there.
So the Christians.
The Christians are burning. In Sweden, they were burning churches and killing people right now as we speak.
Right.
And we sent this information, we sent the pictures, everything. The United States, you're going to do business with ISIS and then let them run free? So before everybody goes all over Israel, fine, I get it. We can talk about Israel in a minute. But where is the leader of the free world? Without that leadership, Julani would not have become the president of Syria. And he depends on that. And there are all these deals that they really need to build Syria from scratch. We have all the leverage in the world that could possibly be for anyone to make sure that they start behaving themselves. We have, use it. I'm talking, of course, about the rebuilding of Syria. And if we use those sanctions as a very strong tool, also over people who will do business with them, all of a sudden things will look very different.
All right, what about Israel's role? We saw Israel take military action to defend the Jews. How far should Israel go to defend the Jews in Syria? Something, of course, we're hearing from the Jews community in Israel.
Look, I was not very, I will surprise you. When I was not very impressed, or very, no, not the word impressed. I was not very happy with the statements at the time by Prime Minister Netanyahu and by Israel Katz, Defense Minister, who said, we will not allow any harm to come to the Druze in Syria, because I knew they cannot do it.
Right.
And all it did, it created a sense of, a false sense of security. And I know that they may have meant it very sincerely at the moment, but what can Israel, now, once you have committed yourself verbally like that, and the whole Middle East heard you, it is no longer a question of the Druze. Let's imagine that there are no Druze there. Let's say there's Armenians, Circassians, Bedouins. You said it. You made it into your international policy. You said it in front of you. You threatened the world. You're going to do this? Keep up your word, man. You cannot now go and say, well, people, well, why should we intervene? Because you said you are going to. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, what are your red lines worth if you're going to just back off in a minute? You said it. It would have been better if you said nothing. Now, giving one one airstrike, there was one airstrike, which was it's okay, but that's not what they said they're going to happen. And when you have 1,000 people murdered like that, and the most that you do is send a drone just to take pictures. Now, I know that many Israeli people in the Israeli public share my frustration because I see it all over the groups. Mm-hmm. I'm a member of Telegram, WhatsApp, all this. And people there are like pulling their hair out. Like, why aren't we, at least when those giant convoys were beginning to move towards, it didn't take too much to just stop it and signal, don't do it. And that would have been over. Mm-hmm. Now it's too hard because now they have, you see what happens here is the ISIS realized a very sensitive point. Israel also has a Bedouin population.
Right.
And if they can frame it as Druze-Bedouin conflict, it's a problem.
All right, well, let's hope those Syrian Jews get some assistance either from the international community, from Israel in some way to ensure the security of their future. Dr. Fadi.
Last sentence. If you don't stop them in Sweden, you will have to deal with them in Kiryat Shmona.
All right. Dr. Fadi Essmael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And now a final word. Belgium's Tomorrowland Festival bills itself as a global gathering of electronic pop fans from over 200 countries, united by a shared love for music, freedom, and connection, where differences fade and friendships flourished. And last weekend, there were moments that seemed to be so. At one performance, young Israelis and Iranians posed together with their respective national flags in what they described as a moving interaction. But a more discordant note came when Belgian police detained and interrogated two Israeli festival goers after a complaint was filed against them by the pro-Palestinian Hind Rajab Foundation, which identified them as IDF soldiers. It was the latest and most blatant effort by the group to have Israelis traveling abroad targeted with legal action for having committed humanitarian crimes simply by virtue of doing their military service in Gaza. Now, to be clear, criticism of Israel's actions in Gaza is legitimate, and the humanitarian situation there is an issue that must be addressed by the government. And when the IDF makes mistakes, this must be acknowledged, such as was done this week regarding the errant shell that hit Gaza's Holy Family Church. And when soldiers commit questionable acts, these must be investigated and, if necessary, dealt with by Israel's justice system. But it is hypocritical and wrong for authorities in other countries to apply standards to Israel which they do not apply even to their own militaries. Civilian casualties by international forces on the battleground in such nations as Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria dwarf those of Gaza. And some 60,000 casualties over the course of nearly 2 years of urban warfare against a terrorist group that deliberately uses civilians as human shields behind which to attack does not constitute a genocide. The very use of that term against Israel is an anti-Semitic calumny when, during just 1 week of a very real genocide, some 100,000 Jews were sent to the gas chambers. But the reckless and feckless use of such language is why Israeli officials have a responsibility to the way they impact internationally when speaking about Gaza. Why the government must do better in communicating their strategy against Hamas moving forward, and why all Israelis, especially those who serve their country in Gaza, must unfortunately now exercise greater caution and discretion when traveling abroad in an increasingly hostile world. Thank you for joining ILTV Security Brief.